Welcome to the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast. The My Fishing Cape Cod podcast is your local source for the latest news and information on fishing Cape Cod. Now, here's your host, Kevin Collins.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast presented by Cape Islands Mitsubishi. I'm your host, Kevin Collins, back with you for another one of our weekly formatted fishing report podcasts. In this edition of the podcast, we're going to be joined by Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle in Falmouth, Massachusetts, and we're going to focus on a red-hot boat bite in Vineyard Sound specifically for sea bass, for striped bass, and for bluefish. And now that we've turned the calendar to June, we're going to do a little preview and rumor mill report on bluefin tuna as well. So plenty to get to on this edition of the pod. Let's welcome in our guest. Evan, how are you today?
Doing great, Kev. How about yourself?
Feeling good. It's a nice start to the week. It looks like we're in for a little bit of good weather, at least Monday through Wednesday. But how you been doing? You get a chance to get out on the boat recently at all?
Yeah, actually, went out this morning with my father, and high tide was at 9. We got out there about 5:45, and we fished. There's a rip basically right in front of Falmouth Harbor. It's a can 17, it's a green can. We fished from there east, and it was just absolutely stacked. I've got 15 to 20 bass, all pretty much overs. There were a few slot fish, maybe one under, but they were all chunky 34 to 36 inch bass. It was just the rip was absolutely stacked with squid. There was big gulls working, so we just basically tried to position ourselves as close to the gulls as we possibly could. They were busting on the calm side. Every time pretty much my dad and I were both throwing the Hoagie Amber popper, and it was pretty much like every cast. Basically the way I like to fish the rips, always fish the calm side, casting on the calm side. And more often than not, before the popper even got to the rough side of the rip, we were hooked up. And then, I'd take my boat out of gear, fight it, release it on the other side, the rough side of the rip. And then as soon as I did that, I'd look at my fish finder, and it was stacked from top to bottom with squid. So, we could see them popping out of the water. And, right now and moving forward, that rip there, Lahamadu, the very tip of it, hedge fence middle ground right now is the best it's going to be for the season. So I highly recommend getting out there. I mean, it was great. There wasn't many boats out there. I think there was 3 of us fishing this morning. But mornings, evenings there, as long as the tide's moving, it's been excellent fishing.
I was in a wedding this past weekend over on the vineyard, and on, Saturday morning, so June 1st, Saturday morning, I was playing golf over there at Mink Meadows, and I got up on a hill and was looking toward, back toward the mainland, looking back toward Falmouth. And you could see, again, this was a Saturday, but flotillas of boats, 10 apiece, little fleets. And it looked like you could throw a blanket, over them. They were so close. So I knew something had popped off, down there this past weekend. It was just a bummer for me to be able to watch it and not be a part of it.
Yeah. All the rips there, those 3, it's great because my boat's at Falmouth Harbor. I barely burned any gas today, literally like half a mile outside of Falmouth Harbor, and we're catching big bass like every cast. And so it doesn't get much better than that. And so I've heard the same thing about hedge fence. Middle ground's been a little different for whatever reason. There seems to be more weeds and mung over at middle ground. There's definitely fish over there for sure, but I've just from talking to my customers and my experience, seems like hedge fence and Lahamadu are the 2 best places right now for bass.
I know we talk about squid a lot, right? Especially the beginning of the summer. It seems like every year when we visit. Do you expect, that bait to stick around? Is there a departure date usually or an expiration date for all that squid, or will it be floating around for a couple more weeks, you think?
I hope for a couple more weeks. Every year is a little bit different. 2 years ago, I was catching bass at middle ground all the way to the end of July. But last year it seemed like around the second to third week of June, I started to see less and less fish at the rips. And then by the, beginning of July, it seemed like it was pretty much all bluefish there. But mostly I wasn't seeing fish on the rips after 4th of July, really. It was at that point it was pretty much all bluefish unless you went east to Chatham and Monomoy. That's where they all boogied to last year. But I think that they should be around for a few more weeks at least. I think I would say right now is prime time for Falmouth. I don't think it's going to get any better than it did this morning. But I think a couple weeks definitely, and it could be like 2022 where we saw squid in the rips all the way through the middle of July. So hopefully the water temperatures do warm up around Falmouth quicker than say Upper Buzzards Bay or around Chatham. So once the water temperature gets to a certain point, they just have to exert 2 times as much energy to get food in that warmer water. So they're just seeking cooler water, which the squid are too. So they're following the bait, but generally they like the cooler water. So hopefully it continues, but right now it's fantastic.
One more question on the bass fishery, especially for the boat guys, Evan. You mentioned some things that were working for you and your dad on your epic trip this morning. Just talk a little bit about squid imitation. If this bait hopefully sticks around and guys are able to target these fish, between now and the end of June, some other good ideas, for squid imitation that Eastman's is stocked up and loaded with for guys to pick up.
Yeah. For me, I've just had so much success with that amber hoagie popper. I mean, it casts tremendously well. Its action in the rips, I think is really good. I mean, there's spook style amber plugs as well. Hoagie makes one, the dog walker. I know Yozuri makes a few poppers and spooks that are squid colored, but that amber color, that excited squid color seems to be, I mean, this morning there was a couple times I was repositioning my boat. I wasn't even looking at my lure. I caught fish. They were so aggressive, and the bait's basically stationary, but it's still giving a little wiggle, and there's some rattle to it too. But there's other things like Nomad makes the squid treks. I know I've sold some to guys, and they've been catching those in the rips and getting them. There were some guys who are jigging, whether it's wire or lead core. Parachute jigs with a jig strip, that's a good squid imitation. And sometimes, particularly when the water warms up, a lot of those bass are deeper. There's a few holes around middle ground, like in front of West Chop, there's a green can there. There's about a 26, 27-foot hole. A lot of guys will jig wire with parachute jigs there, and I've caught some big fish there. And so, there's a few other things. Ron's makes these paddle hawks. They're a paddle tail with a skirt, and I know guys have been casting and jigging and trolling those too. For me, I've just had a lot of luck with the floating surface plug with a rattle, and the more commotion it seems, the better. So, yeah, in one of those. But it was so much fun today with the surface bite with the poppers, just because sometimes they would take us like 3-4 swipes at it before I was hooked up or my dad was hooked up. So it's just super easy to use. It doesn't require much skill, and they cast really well. So, that's what I recommend. But obviously there's a million ways to catch bass, but topwater is definitely my favorite.
Another question I have for you, Evan, about your trip this morning and just in general is the presence of bluefish. So far in our podcast season, we haven't talked a lot about them. It seems like they haven't really been around. Has that changed at all since we've last spoken?
Yeah, my dad caught one of the biggest bluefish I've seen this morning. We didn't measure it, but probably, between 20 and 25 pounds, definitely over 40 inches.
Wow.
Definitely kicked his butt. It took him quite a long time to land it, but it had a huge gut on it. It almost looked like a salmon the way it was. Normally they're long and skinny. This thing was fat. That was the only bluefish we caught today. I have heard of other guys getting them earlier over the weekend. A guy said he got a decent one at Middle Ground.
Good.
Typically, we don't really see them for another couple weeks, but starting now, we're definitely going to see more and more show up, particularly if there's a lot of bait on the south side of Falmouth. Last year there was just a huge biomass of bluefish near the wheat packets, and as the summer progressed, they went a little bit farther south. Around like the Robinsons area, Cuddy Hunk, and then they moved around to Gay Head. And there were days where I'd go out there. It was like today, where fish for bluefish. It was every cast. So they'll be here. And bluefish come in cycles. There were, I think 2019, 2020 weren't great years for bluefish, but the last 2 years were phenomenal. So they're just starting to show up. They probably won't be here in full force for another couple of weeks, but yeah, it was fun to catch one today.
And tell your dad, we don't fat shame bluefish on the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Another species I want to hit on too, Evan, that we haven't, checked off the box yet in our conversation today is sea bass. That fishery has been open for 2.5 weeks now. It kind of got off to a little bit of a slow start, it seemed, we had a lot of snotty weather the week it opened and people weren't able to get out. And then it seemed like we had a plethora of shorts around the area. What are you hearing about black sea bass?
Yeah, fishing is good. It's not lights out, like 2019. I always go back to that year because that was just unbelievable. So when you have years like that, now it's a little bit of a letdown when you actually have to work hard to get them. But seems like talking to guys and fishing myself, they're in a little bit deeper water than you might expect this early. Guys have said they've been fishing in that 55 to 75 foot range. The Rex, Kershaw, between Hedge Fence and Oak Bluffs has been producing. I know on the weekends there's a lot of guys there, but that seems to be a really good spot. And then I know other guys are fishing between, say, Lucas and the Vineyard. I've talked to a few guys that's gotten them in front of Tarpaulin Cove, in that 70-foot range. The fishing is good. You just have to work for them, and you really just got to find them. And then once you're on top of them, they're going to be eating. There's definitely been some bigger fish around, but it sounds like people definitely have to go through some shorts to get some keepers. And guys who really want to get them are going even farther down in Vineyard Sound.
Yeah.
To the Nomans area. I heard that's been very good. So, the fishing in Nantucket Sound's been good. But it sounds like Vineyard Sound's been a little bit better. But, you're able to get your limit. You just got to, it seems, put in a little bit more work.
Does it seem at all to Evan this year, more than past years? Once you find them too, it seems like some of the larger, the more quality sea bass I'm hearing, you mentioned guys have to work hard, but they also got to go a little bit deeper than past years. When it was a little bit easier to target these fish in maybe 30, 35 feet, it seems like the quality ones you're having to work harder for and go out a little bit further.
Yeah, and also too, I would say using bigger baits might help as well. Like if you're using a high-low rig with squid, maybe try it, a larger presentation, like, an 6 or an 8 ounce bucktail with squid or gulp or a jig strip on it. You can use like a teaser rig with a bucktail or, a diamond jig, something that, a smaller sea bass really won't be able to eat, but those knotheads will. So, obviously less hookups with the bigger baits, but, I think that could be something to try to see, to try to weed out some of those smaller fish. So that's been something I've been recommending.
That's great advice. And we've focused most of our report on the boat guys, but before we wrap up our conversation, we'll just touch on the surf casting bite for a quick moment. We focused on that, Evan, our first visit or two back in early May, and it seemed like the bite was pretty good around, the mouths of the salt ponds and whatnot. Just give us a taste of what it's like now that we've flipped and we're already into the first week of June. Are there still fish from the beach around the Falmouth area?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There definitely is. I mean, there will be for the next few weeks at least. The way it kind of always works is that early May, we see the shore guys. That's where the majority of the fish are. And then, as the squid starts to fill into the rips, the fish kind of move over to the rips. So it's probably not as good as it was in May or like mid-May, but it's definitely people are reporting that they're catching fish. Papanesik to it, South Cape Beach, Minot Beach, in the mouth of Great Pond. There's still fish there. I think time of day now is really important. You just can't go out there in the middle of the day and expect to catch a bunch of fish. I mean, you're going to have to go either super early or in the evenings or when the sun's down. And that's really, from here moving forward, if you're fishing from shore, they're going to give you the best chance to get them. So, as the water warms up, I noticed that it was 60 to 61 degrees. So as that water warms up from shore, at least, really got to focus on time of day. And obviously, if you compare a good tide with the time of day, that's going to give you the best chance. But still good. Inside the salt ponds, there's definitely still like schoolies and stuff. And then, all those south-facing beaches have been good too. So, yeah, talking to guys like fishing around Novska, they're doing well, Trunk River. So the shore bite's still pretty good, but focus on time of day and try to pair it with a good tide. One thing I just want to quickly add, as I had heard some whispers about some bluefin tuna around the Gay Head area. So I know that's a little ways away, but they're starting to show up. So, starting to definitely get some more tuna reels, some conventional, international, and Tiagras and things like that spooling up. So, striped bass in front of Falmouth Harbor is great, but those bluefin are going to be showing up here, or they're already here. So a lot of people are getting geared up for that.
Absolutely. And I'm sure folks are going to be knocking down your door once those whispers start getting out, because I know guys have really been already, pounding down our doors for tuna reports here, and we haven't really had a lot. So this is super exciting that you're at least starting to hear things. Yeah,
I had a guy who I trust in the store yesterday, and he said that he could confirm that they were there. So to what degree, I'm not really 100% sure, but it sounded like he definitely knew that they were there. So it's definitely a good sign of things to come, I think.
All right. We'll be sure to check in on that when we chat again in a couple of weeks, Evan. Thanks so much for giving us such a detailed and full report, my friend. It was great catching up with you, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.
All right, great. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it.
My thanks to Evan Eastman of Eastman Sport and Tackle in Falmouth, Massachusetts, for joining us on today's edition of the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast presented by Cape Islands Mitsubishi. And Evan certainly went into great detail on the red-hot striped bass boat bite happening right now off the coast of Falmouth and into Vineyard Sound. He also was in depth that there are some big blues working their way into those waters in Nantucket and Vineyard Sound as well. And the sea bass fishing sounds like has picked up a little bit, at least in deeper water. So all in all, a really encouraging report, and what a tease, topping it off with some word of tuna around the Martha's Vineyard area. So that's another My Fishing Cape Cod Summer Fishing Report podcast in the books. I'm your host, Kevin Collins, and until we chat again later in the week, tight lines and take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the My Fishing Cape Cod podcast. For the latest local news, information, and fishing reports, be sure to log on to myfishingcapecod.com. From all of us at My Fishing Cape Cod, tight lines and take care.